Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Miller. How are you, Tim?
I'm going very well. Aaron, how are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you.
Good.
Well, we are, I guess, in our final quarter of the financial year, and one of the things that presents itself at this time is the fact that individuals decide to exit self-managed super funds. And in that instance, where they decide to exit, there may be the decision around actually winding up the fund. So today we're going to talk about many of the various aspects that need to be considered in the wind up process. And probably the first question, Tim, to you here is when people are thinking about the wind up, if we're here in April now, have we really got enough time to try and tidy this up before 30 June?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good question, Aaron. And I think this is always one of those circumstantial situations for any fund. So, a highly liquid fund, for example, certainly has the potential to wind up by the 30th of June this year. But if we've got funds that are holding property, for example, or other quite unique investments, or potentially have other investment considerations, which we can go through in a moment, then potentially we're looking at, is this the start of a 3-month process, or is it the start of a 15-month process to ensure that the fund can be wound up during the 24-25 financial year?
Yeah, and that really gets to the next point is really understanding the demographics of the members. So are they in accumulation phase? Are they in retirement phase? Are we looking to redeem assets, and therefore the timeframes that you spoke about? Are we potentially transferring assets, and therefore there's a number of tax considerations? And all of these aspects have also come much sharper into focus with the 1 July 2024 stage 3 tax cuts as well.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, we look at it and we say, okay, well, there's this capacity for money to be held outside of the superannuation environment and potentially pay a lower rate of tax on the investment earnings. And what's quite interesting is when you look at the annual statistics from a wind-up point of view that the ATO release, and they released them recently for the 21-22 year, the amount, like the majority of wind-ups are still actually performed in the accumulation phase versus the retirement phase. So it's kind of like 3/5, 2/5 sort of from a numbering point of view there. And the balances are quite significant still. So it's kind of a bit of a fallacy that you're getting down to low balances and then winding the fund up. There's still reasonable amounts being wound up, which mean in 3 out of 5 cases, they're having to be rolled over to another fund. And in 2 of 5, you're either rolling them over because you want to continue to receive an income stream, or you're taking that money out and looking at where to invest it outside of the super environment.
Yeah, and I guess to the extent of rolling over as part of that wind-up process, the introduction of SuperStream into this rollover process creates its own challenges when we're looking at the wind-up of a fund as well.
Yeah, it does. And, the two of us were involved a little bit in some conversations, as many were as well, but with the ATO last year, because when you wind up the fund, you're ultimately notifying the ATO via that final return, and then they cancel the ABN. And a part of the process of utilising SuperStream is that you've actually got to have a valid ABN. The fund has to be on the complying fund register there, and if without that, it can create problems. So, the ATO have expanded that cancellation period from 14 to 28 days, which certainly allows that final cash rollover to be applied through the SuperStream system. But if you don't act quickly, then it can create all sorts of other problems with the fund. And of course, that's totally different for in specie rollovers, because in specie rollovers don't need to utilise the SuperStream. But of course, it's pretty limiting the ability to utilise in specie rollovers. Generally, you're looking at your more of your retail offerings, where you potentially have an investment platform inside the super fund that is then offered by that same retail provider in the super space.
Yeah, so procedure then becomes really important here, because we are looking at obviously compliance with the SuperStream requirements, which obviously we'd see that embedded within the governing rules of the fund, but we need to clearly understand a range of procedural aspects, as we touched on, whether it's accumulation or maybe the member in retirement phase as well. But if I could say to you, what are some of the key areas that individuals really need to focus on from a procedural point of view, what would you say?
Well, I guess the very first thing is, are they sure, right? Are they sure that they actually want to wind up the fund? Because once it's done, it's done, and there's no going back. And so, have they recognised, and I'll touch on how we go procedurally, but have they looked at things like the taxation implications of winding up the fund? Have they got unused losses, for example? Will it trigger significant gains? So some of these sorts of things. Do they have, if they're in retirement, do they have pensions that can't just easily be rolled over? Do they have legacy style pensions within the fund? So from a process point of view, it's pretty critical that firstly that the trustees all agree to winding up the fund, so that they've reviewed their deed to make sure they've gone through that to work out the initial steps. Then that they've communicated to the members of the decision to wind up the fund. Now, again, that always sounds odd in a self-managed super fund because they're the same people, but you need to give the members then the decision or the opportunity to say where they want their benefits paid. So where do they want them rolled over to, or if it's going to be paid out of the fund, do they want that payment via in specie or as a cash payment? So really the process is getting all the ducks in a row in the sense of what the deed requires, then getting your appropriate instructions from the member, and then following through on those instructions, noting that there's going to be that requirement to sell down the existing fund investments. Now, when I say sell down, that incorporates in specie, and you and I had the question only last week about an in specie rollover and whether it triggered a CGT, and the answer there is in accumulation, absolutely. Yep. So recognizing that as a part of that process.
Yeah, and I think the final thing just here to note is then there is a range of administrative functions that need to go with this. So you've got this ongoing requirement as you're working out balances to keep the accounts up to date to ensure that you've got balances that can be determined. So you might end up with some type of sort of interim rollover and then a final rollover, as we touched on before. But we then have other aspects such as a corporate trustee, and the fact that we need to obviously manage the timing of annual reviews and then deregistrations and those sort of things as well. So I guess any other final comments that you want to make on the administrative tasks that we need to just make sure we tidy up on when we're winding up an SMSF?
Yeah, look, I think probably there's two critical administrative ones to ensure that you're not creating issues for the fund. The first one is for those in retirement, making sure that they've met all of their minimum pension obligations and things, because that can have an impact from an ECPI requirement. But the other one is the notification of third parties. Like if you've got employers who are making contributions via SuperStream into the self-managed superannuation fund, have you notified those employers to ensure that the contributions are going to be redirected to a new fund? So it's the little things that potentially, that naturally just occur without the trustees, acting, that we need to make sure that funds are aware of to ensure they don't create problems for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at Smarter SMSF, we do see quite often our winding up trustee documentation prepared. So if you do have funds that are naturally looking to wind up, you can look at the SMSF wind up minutes and documentation that we do have as part of the Smarter SMSF platform. And I'm sure Tim will be touching on the winding up considerations as part of our upcoming SMSF tax planning event. I know it kind of sounds a bit weird, but planning is an integral part of the wind up process.
Absolutely, it's one of those areas, and we love a checklist. So it's certainly one of those areas that we need to contemplate from a tax planning point of view.
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again for joining us for this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. Thanks again, Tim.
No worries, Aaron. And if I can just say, go the Crows in their match up against the Bombers this Friday. And otherwise, I'll see you next week.
Will do. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. Bye for now.